Hello everyone. As you know, at Azim Premji University, we've been doing a series of conversations with leading experts, both from within India and internationally, as part of our Seeking Sustainability series. And in one of our Seeking Sustainability series, we have a special focus on climate change. Let's talk climate change. So it's a great pleasure to have Professor Goswami with us. And this is someone we've been wanting to talk to for a very long time, and we're very pleased that you made it to Azim Premji.
Thank you so much, Harini.
So a brief introduction to Professor Goswami. Doing a complete justice to his introduction will take, I think 10 minutes and a very long conversation. But he has a fascinating background, coming from a small remote village in Assam, then doing a PhD in plasma physics from Ahmedabad, going to MIT and various other places in the US. And when I met him first, he was a professor at the Indian Institute of Science, where I did my PhD. He worked there for several years before moving to the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology in Pune, where he was the director for a long time. And after that, he's now moved to Cotton University in Guwahati, which is closer to home for him, where he's an SERB Distinguished Fellow. But he has, of course, close to 200 publications, academic publications to his credit, member of all the 3 Indian science academies. He's also a member of the World Academy of Science in Italy. And, what is very remarkable about him is, I think after a very long career in academia, looking at the building climate models and helping us understand what happens to climate change, he is now trying to shift his attention to understanding what can India actually do to tackle climate change, and what can we do globally also to tackle climate change. I think we're getting ready for a very fascinating conversation, Professor Goswami.
Thank you, Harini.
So
It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's a great pleasure to have you here. So I'll start with maybe one question. Having seen, your work for a very long time, one of the peculiarities which people don't often understand, and I realized this when I was in the US for a short time, a colleague of mine was saying, from India, was saying this US monsoon is very well behaved. If they tell you that it's going to rain at 12 o'clock, it rains at 12 o'clock. And if they tell you it stops raining at 4 o'clock, it stops. And it's not that we have not the capacity to predict it in India, but it's just that the Indian monsoon is horrendously complicated. Right?
Yes.
And so your work over a very long time has been fundamental in understanding how to take the global models of climate change, which often don't apply very well to the Indian context, and really tinker with these models or redefine them completely to understand how our predictions are more locally appropriate. And of course, the Ministry of Earth Sciences now has this large complex modeling system with IITM Pune, which you were responsible for helping them set up. So I wondered if you could give us a little history of this. What is the Indian modeling system of monsoon, and how has it been set up?
Oh, that's my pleasure. So let me start with a small story. So basically, I started my research in ISC, which is basically a fundamental research organization, and we did a lot of work on fundamentally understanding the monsoon and its variability. For nearly 20 years, I worked on that. But I also realized that we need to apply this knowledge to forecasting applications, because improving the forecast is the most important thing, both in the weather time scale, like in few days, and also on seasonal time scale, like what will happen to the long term. So, and in India at that point of time, our both weather forecasting as well as the seasonal or the climate forecasting was way behind the rest of the world, because the world has the forecasting capability in the worldwide has rapidly advanced from 70s. It was discovered in 1950, first weather forecast was made. Then with evolution of computers as well as understanding the system through more data, better data coming in, and better modeling capability, the forecasting skill improved steadily. And by early 2100, we had in the extratropics, we were able to predict 7 days in advance weather, and that is what you were mentioning in the beginning. So, but in the tropics, we still had a lot of difficulty. That is fundamentally the problem, because tropical systems are more difficult to. It is controlled by these clouds, and the clouds' evolution is very unpredictable, very fast. And so, any small errors make them differ from observations quickly. So, therefore, it has been a challenge. But still, elsewhere, the predictions had improved to about 3 days in advance. But India, we are not able to progress at all. So we are in a way behind the rest of the world for various reasons. I can talk about that at some other point. But we're about 20, 30 years behind the rest of the world at that point of time. So around that in 2006, so when I was offered a position at IITM, I realized that it is time to spend some time on what I have learned about the systems and try to apply it to improve forecast. So that is what is required, because improving these models requires better understanding of the fundamental understanding of the processes. Then you need to go to the model to improve them, to the physical formulation of those models. So this, without actually fundamental research, it cannot happen. And that is also known globally. So I thought that I will make that a try. Whether we will succeed or not, we did not know. And IITM at that point of time was in a very, sort of crossroads. The no recruitment. There are not enough people who can lead research, and infrastructure was crumbling, and so it was a very bad stage. So I was not sure I would be able to do anything. But fortunately, something happened around that time. That is the Ministry of Earth Science formed, and therefore there was more focus on helping to build these. So we had serious problem in terms of capacity of building models. So model building requires these capacities, like improving the physical systems. That is one part of important part of model building. And because of this, for the last almost 30 years, since we did not focus on modeling, the India Meteorological Department and the community was somewhat complacent, saying that we can do these models, predictions, whatever data that we have. But that was not possible, and absolutely not possible, physically not possible. And globally, it has been shown that models have to be improved, and then only we can have a better forecast. And so this was required, but not really. For that, you need people who know how to do it. That capacity was missing. And the infrastructure to do this was also missing. It requires high-performance computing, which was not there in the country. So there are two very important things were missing, and we required to build that up.
So human capacity and
human capacity and the technology, both were missing. And so, but to my luck, that was the Minister of Arts and Found, and fortunately, I was able to sort of plan in the beginning that we'll have big programs to do this, and it was supported by the Ministry of Arts and Sciences. And so we devised this what I now call a monsoon mission project, under which all both these aspects were given very important focus, like capacity building, train people to do modeling, and also enhance our understanding the system by using better data collection, specifically to understand processes. So we had several programs like that. In addition to that, parallelly, we started a long-term program of acquiring supercomputers. And all these things fortunately succeeded with the help of, and as a result, we were able to set up the necessary. So we started with models, as you mentioned. The models have to be global models. It doesn't really matter where you bring it from, because that building block is same. But what happens is, and the climate is also actually global phenomenon. But the regional climate does get affected by the regional processes. Like for monsoon. Monsoon is a sort of different thing that doesn't happen in other places. The monsoon has clouds which are different from other places. So in the model, we should be able to simulate those correctly. And somebody who develops a model, their priority may not be doing this. So they will be having developmental agenda somewhere else. They will be doing maybe the El Nino and sudden oscillation may be an important issue. They will focus on that, how I can improve it. But they will not have a focus on whether they have to improve the monsoon. And this has been missing. So we needed India-centric effort on that. That is why we called it a monsoon mission, Indian monsoon mission. And so we actually involved international community also. In fact, we funded some research through international community to improve our model. It's not that their model will improve. So we had a model, we had known these are the deficiencies of this model, how can we improve? So this research has led us to improvement of this model. Together with our own research and contributions from international community, in a period of about 8 years, we were able to achieve a great deal in both weather forecasting system, Now we have a very state-of-art weather forecasting system in the IMD, which was developed and then developed, tested, and transferred to IMD for operation. Similarly, we have something called the extended range forecast system, which is called the active and break spells during the monsoon. These spells are longer, not like weather. They can go to about 15 days. The weather is like 3-4 days or 5 days, right? And these things are like 2 weeks or slightly longer sometimes. So these spells are also very important for agricultural practices. So we need to tell them, okay, is it going to be a wet spell or is it a dry spell? If it is a dry spell, they will not sow. So this is something very, and this information is now, and this is now is being operationalized, and this information now goes to this actually farmers. And all these are now benefiting Indian farmers and fishermen in a big way. And in fact, some economic survey now says that we are economic saving amounts to $1.2 billion every year from the improved forecast.
At how much, if I
take a little bit of credit for that.
No, absolutely. And I think this is, to me, very fascinating because it is a story of climate change, but it is actually a story of how India should be approaching, I think, everything on everything.
Absolutely. We should have a good scientifically based plan.
Our own economic models, our own conservation
handholding from government. And that support is very important. Unfortunately for me, that was there at that time, and which I think is not always there. And that is, I was lucky to have it.
Lucky, and also look at I'm thinking, of course, India, it would have been very expensive for India to fund it, but you can see the spillover effects. $1 billion saved.
Absolutely. So it is 50 times the amount of money we spend in supercomputers. We are gaining in 5 years.
And so many, because the farmers are the poorest of the poor, so are the fishers. And
it goes to the right people.
Exactly.
Right.
Plus, India's backbone of the economy continues to be its agriculture.
Absolutely.
And, climate is and weather are huge components.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a perfect time for me to ask you the next question, which is very topical because, of course, we have the latest IPCC 6 synthesis report. And it's a very grim picture of, what I think globally what India's future is headed to, but also specifically there's, a lot on India in this report and the climate change scenario. So what do you think, very frankly, what is the path, what is your assessment of what India is going to have to tackle?
Absolutely. I completely agree with the IPCC report. And in fact, I feel that they have been too mild.
Always.
I'm sorry. But you must remember that the IPCC report is a consensus report based on thousands of scientists who have looked at all the data that is available and understood and come to a consensus that this should be this is what is happening. So that is definitely a moderate estimate. So my take is that we should think that it is going to be even worse and then prepare for that. And that is why I believe that all countries, including India, needs to take a much bigger responsibility and action just today. And we cannot think about zero emission being delayed to 2070, which it should be, the zero emission should be 2030, and I think we just cannot live without. And we can always give a lot of justification because of our requirement of development, but development is, and it's always required. It is never going to go because population is increasing, and this will always be but development over these decades cannot be continued because that is always going to put more demand in the energy, and that energy demand is going to drive more fossil fuel, and it is simply not sustainable. Today we must just stop that and think even if we have to do sacrifices, whatever sacrifices personally or politically, whatever sacrifices we have to do at this time. Otherwise, I think we'll definitely have a very serious crisis in our hand.
And I think what people don't understand is that, saying not people, obviously the people who are planning often understand it, but others may not understand is, if we continue to develop at this rate, saying that the poor in India need it, and of course they need it, but they will be hardest hit by the climate change, which will become even worse.
Absolutely. That is what I'm going to talk about this in the talk, that the effect is going to be most on the vulnerable section because the hydrological disasters are affecting. The rich and mighty are going to live in their high-rise building, but the poor people who are going to be most affected, their income is not going to rise at the rate at which the disaster is going to affecting them. Their whatever little saving is there, one flood just wipes them out.
Exactly.
And so, is it going to suffer? Even if the rate at which our per capita income is growing, it's very peanuts.
Especially at that
level.
Yes.
And that is per capita is 2,000. But think about the last data. What is their income? And then how they will be affecting. So, this population is going to suffer anyway. And this will intensify their suffering. Instead, we have to go to a model where maybe growth is less, but profit for the investors are less, but it is more equitable.
Much more
equitable.
Absolutely.
And that might save, or at least balance. People are going to die anyway because of lack of resources. And either they die because of these disasters, or they die due to lack of resources. So I think.
Yeah. So if we have to put our attention there and say, how do we prevent or at least reduce the death and suffering that comes because of disasters? What should we gear up for? So monsoon, what are the exact changes that we anticipate in the monsoon?
Okay.
And how will these affect, let's say, farmers or cities or, in the different sectors broadly?
That's a very loaded question, and there is a lot to say about it. But I'll briefly say that monsoon, with the increasing temperature, global temperature, of course, local temperature is also increasing. But even if local temperature is not increasing, the global temperature change can affect the monsoon because it is a part of a large-scale system. But local temperatures are also increasing. So when the local temperature increases, the moisture holding capacity of the atmosphere increases, and that is that means it can hold more moisture. And therefore, the potential for more rain also increases. But potential for more extreme events increases more, because atmosphere becomes now a little more unstable, because lighter, the water vapor is lighter than the surrounding dry air. So the air is a little more lighter. So the surrounding where there is less moisture, then a small updraft can produce a condense.
So it can move from one place to another.
No, condense them. So our clouds form by condensing the moisture. How do you condense moisture? So you have to lift them, basically.
So that it goes upper when it's cooler.
No, it expands because the lower pressure expands and cools. Also, ambient temperature is colder. So at some point of time, it becomes supersaturated. And when it is supersaturated, it condenses and starts producing rain. So that uplift is required. It happens either through the mountains when the winds go and hit against the mountain, they go up. That is why in the Western Ghat we get so much rain. We get so much rain in Assam because there are mountains. The wind pushes them up and produces rain. Now, anyway, even in Bay of Bengal now, suppose even if there is no wind, but some systems can produce uplift. Suppose there is a low pressure area. The low pressure area then produces a little upward motion there. It produces convergence of winds, and that convergence of wind produces upward motion and start producing cloud. That is how we have a lot of rain in that region. So now, if you have a small perturbation in anywhere, somewhere by some waves or something, that perturbation can uplift, and that uplift can produce now a more convection, and then more convection will produce more latent heat in the atmosphere. Then that more heating will converge more moisture into that column, produce a big event. And then when it's a big event, because its stronger convection brings in more moisture from all the surroundings and sort of dries out the neighborhood and produces a big rainfall in local events. So that is why extreme events are going to increase. But then because it is drying out, because some extreme events are happening here and there, so it is drying out the neighborhood for a time, then the moisture has to come and fill it up. The small rains will decrease, because then that is what we are finding. And that is what one of the studies we had done sometime back, 2006, just when I was living. We had shown that the small and medium events have decreased in central India. And while these very big events, like 15 centimeter a day rain events, have increased doubled. And so this is going to be one very important factor, and which is very well documented. And these events have the potential for producing flash floods, erosion, and etc. And the other thing that because of the small, medium events decreasing, it actually produces some problem about our recharge, the groundwater recharge. It is the small, light rain persisting for a long time
that actually goes
through.
Yes.
And that is reduced. And these heavy events are lot of rain comes in, it cannot go there, it saturates the ground, and then it runs off. So most of it runs off. So this is a kind of double bad effect of these climate change, and which is going to continue everywhere and increase. The other important thing that can happen is that total quantum of monsoon rainfall can also change. Because now you say that, okay, I have a lot of more moisture in the whole Indian region, so I should have more rain. But it doesn't work that way everywhere. Because large-scale rain requires a large-scale circulation, which will favor that. And monsoon has a favorable condition because we have a whole what you call winds coming from cross-equatorial flow that goes around the is a monsoon trough region. This across the Gangetic Plain, and then goes by the side of Himalayas, produces a system called monsoon trough. And that monsoon trough is again a system where the large-scale winds produces a little updraft. And that little updraft is good to produce all the systems, the low pressures, depressions. Those low pressure depression then come towards land and produces our main rain system. So, okay. So we get all that rain now. Is it going to increase or decrease? That is a question that also we studied. It turns out that for that, you need a very long-term data. Unfortunately, our data, although India has a very good set of data, but still it is about 100 years data is reasonably good data is there. But beyond that, 120 years, beyond that we did not have too much data. But in a time frame of 100 years or so, sometimes this internal sort of natural variability, there are sometimes ups and downs in this time on a natural scale. Right. We have to isolate that from what is due to trend, a long-term trend. To long-term trend, you have to generate a longer time series, which we have done again. And then from all that carefully, we have estimated that the overall in the monsoon, over this period up to present in the historical period, the Indian monsoon rainfall quantum is increasing by about 3% per 1 degree centigrade of global change. So that's like about 3% overall, let us say up till now. But it has special variation. If you go to northeast, it is actually not increasing because there is some system that does not have that capacity to give the uplift. And therefore, it is decreasing actually. Right. There is also about decreasing about 3% per degree increase in the global temperature. So there is this kind of changes also are taking.
So northeast will face flash floods as well as more prolonged drought.
Correct.
So because of the extreme events and anyway deforestation and the other things that we're doing. And drought because...
So drought actually, on the long term, drought will slightly reduce because now what is... In the future when we see, and the projections indicate that northeast will also increase eventually because there will be too much moisture in the atmosphere. Eventually. It will change over to a slightly increasing trend. So northeast, there will always be a high level of, but on the top of that, the extreme events are going to be even more. And important thing about northeast is that northeast extreme events are even more extreme than the central India because their mean rainfall is
anyway
high, and their extremes are to the the 90%, 99 percentiles are much
higher over that mean.
Exactly. And those events are doubling.
So if I can ask you, so that is going to, these extreme events will impact the fisheries and they will impact agriculture. But what about cities? Because cities are anyway now, because of the heat islands, modifying their own microclimate.
Cities are going to be facing a much more serious problem because cities are mostly affected by flash floods. right?
Correct.
So these are the flash flood comes from the extreme events.
Like Bangalore was in November.
Exactly.
People were moving around in the layouts next to me in coracles and had to be evacuated.
I understand. The basement was fully, and those all the 100, 200 families as a stuff.
People actually passed away also.
And
they couldn't get
no food, water, medicine, this, that, and so and this is going to increase, and because the events are going to increase, but infrastructure is already built up, and we are not changing that unless we change that, which is also almost impossible. So this is we need to response needs to be developed in a different way, keeping this in mind, so that if this happens, how the municipality can respond to the people and save people and make them adapt to this kind of changes, because this is going to be more and more happening.
So, because if you think of our cities, so now we're still 33% urban, depending on definitions of cities, of course, but let's say broadly 33% urban. And very soon, 2-3 decades, if we continue on our growth projections, we'll be 50-60% urban, which means those cities in a way have to be built. We can build differently.
We are talking about hundreds of smart cities today, but I don't see the plan of is it being built in terms of in the hydrologically smart.
Yes, exactly.
So I think I think that is going to be a very key message to the planners, that it must be. We are talking about green. We are talking about green, but it is not talking. We are not talking about hydrologically smart, and that definitely going to be a challenge. But if you can't build it, don't build it. Because I think if you build it, it will create more disasters. Right.
So, also, are there any large-scale pattern shifts in the monsoon that are going to take place?
Yeah, that's a very nice question, actually. That was not very clear until recently. So we have done some recent research which indicates that the monsoon, the spatial pattern of the monsoon. Now, as you know, monsoon has a very interesting spatial pattern, right? Like the northeast is very wet and the northwest is very dry, right? It's a semi-arid region. And in the southern part also, the west is wet and the east is dry. So this is a very interesting spatial pattern. And now, what we thought is to look at is how this will change. So it turns out that over the last historical period, this whole pattern is, at least in the northern part of the pattern, is shifting towards west. In other words, we know that the monsoon is decreasing in the east, so there is a little bit of decrease of rainfall in the east, but there is a lot of larger scale rapid increase in the west. So in fact, in Rajasthan and Gujarat and Rajasthan, the temperature, the rainfall, there is an evidence that 20% increase of rainfall has taken place, 20% to 25% already. And these we have established by looking at a lot of model simulations, and as well as from observations. Observations show that, and then models also simulate it almost like that. Ensemble models do simulate. But in going forward, we find the ensemble model simulations show that this is going to intensify. In other words, it is going to increase to about at least 50 to 100% in some region. 100% where there is very little rain, they will increase by more than 100%. But where there is rain, like 40 centimeter rain, we might change to 60 centimeter, and that is going to make a big difference. That is, even by 2050, it can happen. By 2021, it might even increase to almost 75% to 100% change in many of these regions where there is actually substantial amount of rain already. So this makes it's a very big I think going to make a very big impact in terms of that semi-arid region getting converted into much more humid climate, and that will make a big difference in terms of their agricultural productivity. And so this will become another zone like Central India zone. It can happen. It can happen.
If we plan for it.
If we plan for it. So the point is, the main important point is that these rains are going to come because it's already semi-arid region. When it increased rainfall are going to come from bursts of heavy rainfalls. There always rainfall, about 50-60% of the main rainfall comes from these extreme events. Extreme events are going to increase much more over there. And as a result, the associated hydrological disaster are also going to increase. Therefore, we have to plan. Also, for making it convert to green, we need to sustain that water, save that water for the winter season, because and the groundwater must be enhanced. So, water harvesting in a very big way is required, so that we can store this water, and enhance the groundwater, so that winter vegetation can be sustained. Because normally, winter vegetation dies over there completely, because there's no moisture. Now, moisture has to be available somewhere. If there is moisture is available in some aquifers, we can store them.
Absolutely.
Then we can sustain the vegetation, and then we can accelerate this growth.
So, if I could just summarize some of the points that I'm hearing you say, I think one of the things we are getting very clearly is that climate change is not something that is going to happen in 2100.
Correct.
We're in the middle of climate change.
Oh, yeah.
It's happening.
It's already happened.
Oh, yeah. And we can't say that we're going to be net zero in 2070. We have to be in 2030, as you said. We have to start very seriously transitioning out of our dependence on, let's say, whether it's fossil fuel or becoming hydrologically smart or changing our agriculture patterns or our urbanization, how we plan our cities. So, if I have to ask you then, what would you think India should be focusing on, not in, let's say, 2070? 2023 we are now, between 2023 and 2030. What are the main things that as a country we should be focusing on?
So, we must be, that is what I'm going to emphasize in my lecture also, that we must focus on adaptation, because
So not mitigation.
you do whatever do, because I don't believe that you are doing enough in mitigation, and you are not going to do enough. We are stuck with the climate change, and we have to live with this. My children and grandchildren have to live with this change, and up to by the end of the century, anyway 2.5 degrees to 3 degrees are temperature increase is going to happen. Even if we do everything today, everything today,
1.5
we are stuck.
is impossible.
We are stuck. So forget about this thing. You have to do it, but I'm not thinking about it. But what I'm thinking is how people will adapt. So you will need adaptation policies. So hydrological disaster is one of the major concern that is going to affect agricultural productivity and human misery, livelihood, life, everything. So as a result, we need actually very resilient policy for adapting to hydrological disasters. And two things I can think about is a flood forecasting system. Very smart flood accurate flood forecasting system should be all over the country. Should be on a large scale, just like weather forecast we have done today. Should be employed and established, which is doable. It needs a little bit of thinking. It is technologically doable. Everything is done.
You have the expertise.
Yeah, expertise is there. Data is there. Computer is there today. I think this can be done. But in addition to that, we need to adapt, for make people adapt and reduce life loss and livelihood loss. You need to build shelters. So, see, flood management so far has been by following the flood control measure. Control the flood. Let not flood enter this village. So you made an embankment. Doesn't work. Doesn't never work. The 100 years we are following that.
Yes.
Disband that and come to a different policy of flood management. Live with flood, but live with flood is with these two things, that either forecast the flood, evacuate people, take them to shelters, and then you can live with it.
Because when we think of,
and then you can get the benefits of the floods. Floods being a lot of fertile soil to the ground, and without fertilizer we can grow.
So Netherlands is now building floating cities. I was just looking at that process, but I was just thinking, when we think of the sea level rise, the way we present it to people and the way they think of it is it's almost permanent. Bombay will go, but it's not that. It comes, it goes. It comes, it goes, and we really have to think of how to live with it, like you said.
We have to live with it, and I think this is my message is that we cannot change climate change now. I think we have passed that. That is what I think somebody asked me, have we passed the tipping point? We have passed in some ways, even scientifically, but from human adaptation point of view also almost we have passed. So therefore what we need is how to
Infrastructure adaptation.
in the infrastructure. So innovation in technology have to adapt to this. So don't invest too much money on this. Invest, but you need much more investment on coming up with smart technology for all this, building shelters, building forecasting systems and all that. That also requires innovation. And so that you can make it cheaper and easier.
Or building up buildings with cement that maybe traps carbon, all of these things.
All this, yeah. So at least, as I said, that I think we need to build a large number. See, the cyclone forecast and cyclone shelters have now made us resilient to tropical cyclones.
Yes.
Even if a category 5 cyclone come, not a single person dies.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very great
achievement,
great achievement.
Great achievement of the country, and we have shown leadership in the whole world.
Yes.
And we can replicate that for flood. I can see that I can replicate it if I gain the money and resources. So and this is what should be done, and innovate in that. So all this, because shelters now you have to build many more shelters, but shelters cannot be built with all the same old technology, because then again you will need energy. So come up with technology which will build large shelters and large-scale durable shelters without having to use cement and concrete.
Absolutely. So
why can't we do that?
We should definitely do that. But also, I know you've been paying a lot of attention to how should India's economic models to go. So maybe I'll wind up with that last question. How do you think we should be economically planning for our future development strategy?
Okay, this is a loaded question because I'm not an economist. But I'm sort of compassionate about environment, okay?
And I think we need inputs now into our actual economic growth from many non-economists, because there are such implications for the economy.
That's what I have been reading about it, and this is what I'll also in my talk I'll touch upon it, and what I read and what I feel is what we should be doing. So I think the growth model based on GDP growth. So far we are doing GDP growth. GDP growth models encourage industries which consume a lot of energies. And if you continue that GDP model growth, the energy consumption, we are not going to put any brake on energy consumption. If you don't put any brake on the energy consumption, we cannot achieve our emission target at all, no matter what we say. So therefore, that in my opinion, common sense opinion, without being an economist, is that energy, because there is a lot of evidence that the model of the GDP growth model requires high-end industries, and they are all high energy consuming, high emission energy consuming, and therefore high emission. So therefore that cannot be sustained. So therefore there's ecological economists have come up with something called post-growth model. And so post-growth model or degrowth model. Degrowth models are like, okay, we have developed so far we have required growth to feed people, but I think we cannot continue. Now we have to consciously think that we will not adopt that model, but go to a model which will be abandon all the industries that require heavy, cut down the industries that require heavy, move over to industries or smaller medium scale industries which can sustain more jobs, and maybe profit is a little less, but it is more equitable. And then so we have been focusing on efficiency. Efficiency means everything automatization. That reduces jobs. I think we have to go back to models where more human intervention may be even better for the sustainability. It is not that efficiency is going to give us a benefit. In terms of efficiency makes it more profitable, but it is not sustainable. So we have to change that. And in my opinion, this is a common sense. Okay, this is not economist model. I feel that degrowth model is going to be should be adopted by everybody, including India. I believe. Maybe somebody will actually catch me on this. But I think it requires a lot of studies, a lot of debate. I think we have to have intense debate on this nationally, internationally, and even the IPCC should adopt this idea that if we go to a different pathway, the economic pathways that we have, SSP 2.4, 8.5, etc., etc. All those are different scenarios. People have not thought about this degrowth and regrowth. We have to incorporate that and demonstrate how future climate will evolve if we adopt this today, and which I believe will be much more sustainable. So I think
absolutely. No, and it's interesting when you said IPCC, because for the first time, of course, they have come out very strongly to say in unambiguous language that fossil fuel has to be phased out.
Right.
And that itself took so long to get a absolute language. Right? So degrowth will be another politically very
challenging. It will be very challenging. I can see that.
But I can see, I think we need to stop having these boundaries of this is the climate change scientists' domain, this is the economist domain. We have to all start speaking to each other and coming to some common understanding of the paths.
I see there is a lot of, some writing is taking place now. I want this to be I hope that this will evolve into a much more bigger debate, and sooner than later, we will come to some kind of an understanding.
Some kind of a common understanding. With that, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, Professor Goswami. Thank you so much. I look forward to further conversations with you.
Wonderful. Thank you.